And you're probably going to call me a little bit old-fashioned, because I think if a news network promoted themselves as the most trusted name in news, you'd expect them to be A, trustworthy, and B, presenting actual news. I mean, if they didn't do that, then it would be reasonable to say they're misleading their audience, wouldn't it? But that's exactly what the cable news network, better known as CNN, have been doing. One of their operatives has just been caught admitting the network is effectively just a propaganda machine for the left. In a devastating release, Project Veritas in America has caught CNN director boasting about how the network engages in propaganda, and their focus, unashamedly, was to remove Donald Trump from office. They did this in a two-pronged attack. Firstly, they would concoct stories about Trump to portray him in a negative light. And secondly, they would present images of Biden to show him as a vigorous and healthy individual. Here's one boast about inventing an illness to weaken Donald Trump.
Like when Trump was, I don't know, like his hand was shaking or whatever like that, we brought in like so many medical people to like all tell a story that like it was all speculation, that he was like neurological damage, like that he was losing it, he's unfit to, you know, whatever. We were creating a story there that we didn't know anything about, you know, so that's I think that's propaganda.
And then there's this about how they supported the very frail Joe Biden.
You know, show shots of him jogging, him in aviator shades, and like you paint him as a young geriatric.
Well, this is clearly just more evidence that you simply cannot trust what is presented to you by the mainstream media. They are partisan cheerleaders. They create a narrative that suits their agenda. And believe me, it is an agenda. At CNN, for example, the head honcho, that's a chap named Jeff Zucker, sets the agenda for the entire network.
Who decides that?
The head of the network, like, just...
Who's that? Is that Zucker?
Zucker, yeah. I imagine that he's got his council and they've all, like, discussed, like, where they think...
Now, if you listen to that properly, it's precisely what the idiots on Twitter and people like Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd accuse News Corp of. That's the owner of this network. The difference is that those people have no evidence to support their bitter smears, and they are bitter smears. This is just another case of the left's application of Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals in action. You accuse your opponents what you are guilty of. But this betrayal of trust in the presentation of propaganda as news has been widely suspected for some time. The evidence has been there, hiding in plain sight. And I've repeatedly pointed out over the years that the mainstream media will ignore news they don't want you to know while pushing a steady diet of tripe to help your views align with theirs. Now, I'm very proud to be associated with a network that values the difference between news and opinion. Unashamedly, I have strong opinions and I share them with you. But a network that celebrates discussion and debate as a means of reaching the truth rather than pushing falsehoods to hoodwink the public is to be valued. And that's what we do right here. Anyway, you've now been warned. Here's what CNN's next propaganda campaign is going to be.
So that's like the next
pandemic like story like that will beat to death, but that one's got longevity, you know what I mean? It's not like there's a definitive ending to the pandemic, or you know, like it'll taper off to a point that it's, you know, not a problem anymore. Probably think it's going to take years, so they'll probably be able to milk that for quite a bit.
You can bet your bottom dollar that their ABC will be following the CNN blueprint when that comes around. Okay, now I'm going to be joined by someone who understands how to manage public relations, and it's the delightful Gemma Tonini. Gemma, thank you for your time tonight. Tell me this.
Thanks, Cory.
Wouldn't the first rule of public relations be don't get taught lying? And yet that's pretty much what CNN have been busted doing, isn't it?
Well, I guess I really don't love the phrase public relations. I'd rather call it reputation management, if you can indulge me that one gentle nuance, because this really is.
Yes, ma'am.
Everything about a news organisation is about reputation. A news organisation trades on its credibility, on its transparency. And I keep coming back to this one thing, Cory, that every journalist who is in this profession is obliged to deliver under their code of ethics, if that even stands for something anymore, is fairness and accuracy. Fairness and accuracy. Fairness can be, I suppose, a little bit more objective, I guess, in 2021, but accuracy isn't objective. Accuracy is about truth. And what we've seen in this video, this stuff that's been released today, and thank goodness for Project Veritas, they're doing incredibly important work. It just goes to show why most people are sceptical of mainstream media, why journalists, particularly in the US, it's so much more toxic over there, are morphing into activists. To boast that you created, which is essentially what this chap's done, that your network was involved in creating propaganda that removed a sitting president or assisted in influencing the outcome of an election. I mean, here's the truth, Cory. Every news organisation under the sun has a degree of publication bias. Every news organisation does. That's to deny that is simply naive. But the difference is you can have a publication bias, but it doesn't stop you from being a journalist, and it doesn't stop the news editors from being news editors. I worked for 10, 11 years in commercial news before I left and started my firm. So I'm not talking from a place of never having worked in the industry. Publication bias is simply par for the course. Like, for example, a law firm might have a particular bias towards a political bent, or any other firm might have a bias toward a political bent.
But that's entirely legitimate, isn't it?
Correct,
that's
absolutely.
Okay, that's allowed. You
right.
know what you're dealing with. And you understand that the opinion that's going to come that way is going to support that agenda.
Right.
But they don't make stuff up that is completely untrue. And CNN have been busted doing that.
They've been caught red-handed. They've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And the other part of this, Cory, is not just the sin of omission, but the sin of commission, or the sin of omission, rather. And that is not reporting the full story. And what's absolutely staggered me today is how large chunks of the media have conveniently forgotten that, particularly in the Australia Post saga, that was started by Labor. Labor were well on that bandwagon from day one, bringing up the watches, saying her position was untenable. And where has that been in the reportage of the last 48 hours? All we've seen, particularly from the ABC, is, dressed in white for suffragettes and this blistering attack on Scott Morrison for his bullying. I mean, that's, in my view, the behaviour of the Prime Minister is a legitimate part of that story, but not to the exclusion of everything else, and not to this post-truth revisionism that says that the Labor Party and the opposition was completely, uninvolved in that saga. I mean, that's an example of the sin of omission that affects the truthful telling of a story that's important in the national narrative.